If you're an enterprise architect or an aspiring enterprise architect, then what I'm going to tell you today will save you at least 5 years of pain. Today I'm condensing 15 years of my experience into 3 truths that no white paper or certification ever told me. Stay till the end because the third one might actually change the way you think about enterprise architects and enterprise architecture. My career as an enterprise architect has been very interesting. It's a very, very interesting story. I got into enterprise architecture by mistake. So this is about 16 or 17 years ago when I was working as a technology or application architect at Microsoft. Well, I started my career as a programmer, and a technology architect is just a fancy way of saying a programmer, right? Programmer who basically works on design and architecture of applications and does a little bit more than a junior programmer. So it's essentially a senior programmer, right? Now, since I had done programming for the first stage of my career, right, starting from the year 2000 all the way till 2009, application programming is what I could think about all the time. So when I got the first opportunity as an enterprise architect, I didn't actually know what an enterprise architect is. I thought in my head that an enterprise architect is an architect who designs enterprise applications. I could not think beyond application programming, right? So I applied for the job. Now, luckily, the person who was interviewing me was not my hiring manager, and he also thought that an enterprise architect is somebody who designs enterprise applications or really large applications. So he interviewed me as if he would interview an application architect. And I was a pretty damn good application architect, so I cracked the interview. And then I had a brief discussion with my hiring manager about, about my career and about various things, nothing specific to enterprise architecture. And then I got the job. Now, when I started, or when I had the discussion about what I'm supposed to be doing in that organization as an enterprise architect, my manager told me that, we are going to look at the business and we're going to take a look at the various business functions, and then we look at how the data or what data is being utilized by these business functions and what processes are there that this data supports and what is it that this data is trying to do and how the data evolves over a period of time and how is data interchanged between various business functions and processes. And then how the applications support this evolution of data and these processes and how all of this is interconnected. And then the technology infrastructure, how is the applications hosted, where the data is hosted, is there redundant data, are there redundant technologies, are there redundant applications, are there redundant processes, can we make them more efficient, how can we make them more efficient? Look at the cost factors of various applications and technologies and processes, and look at turnaround times and value propositions. And when I heard all of this, I panicked a little bit because I had no idea what I'm going to be doing. At this point in time, a very good friend of mine, Dhananjay, told me that there's something called a TOGAF certification, and then I did the TOGAF certification and I understood the framework a little bit, and then I started using the framework a little bit, and that's when I actually became an enterprise architect. So it's been a tumultous journey, and the learnings haven't come easily to me, all right? I made a lot of mistakes. The first 1 year of being an enterprise architect went in trying to understand what enterprise architecture is and what the hell we are going to be trying to. So I definitely did not hit the ground running. And this is not something that I would want from others. I mean, if given a chance, I would, if I get a do-over with what I know today, I'd be able to do much better. But the point is that I can't do a do-over, but what I can do is help others start right. So today we're going to talk about those 3 truths that I learned the hard way, that is the condense. Now, obviously, there aren't just 3 truths and there are more, but if I were to condense it into 3 truths, this would be it. But before I get on with the 3 truths, I'd like to remind you that if you enjoy the videos that I publish on Enterprise Architecture Radio, then please let YouTube know. Like, share, subscribe, you know what to do. But when you do it, it helps me in understanding my audience better, and it helps me do all of this. And This is a weekly video and it's a tremendous amount of hard work. Sometimes I have to record the video 2 or 3 times to get it right, and then there's a good number of hours of editing and then the publishing and all of that. So, when YouTube knows that I'm putting in all the effort, it helps me do it better. It encourages me to do it better. So let's get on with it. Lesson number 1. Enterprise architecture is a negotiation and not a command and control. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about enterprise architecture. They think that being an enterprise architect, they report into the CIO and everything is controlled by them within the organization, right? All the projects have to be approved by the EA, all the applications, all the technologies, all the procurement of technologies, all the design decisions, everything has to be approved and controlled by the EA. All the standards have to be followed. All the best practices have to be followed. There can be no exceptions. If there are exceptions, then people have to justify the exceptions and so on. If you go that path, and I have seen a couple of organizations that have gone that path and not been very successful. What happens if you try to do a command and control approach is the ivory tower. I have talked about the ivory tower in one of my previous episodes, but I'm going to talk about it again. An ivory tower is a tall tower that is made of ivory, which means that it is very expensive. Now, the enterprise architects are sitting on top of this tower. What that means is they have no understanding of the ground reality, and then they are throwing standards and best practices from top of the tower on the people on the ground who are actually doing the implementation of projects and who are actually doing the implementation of the practices and the standards that are being thrown from the top of the tower. Now, just because I'm saying that people on the ground doesn't mean that they are junior people or anything, okay? It just symbolizes the ground reality, right? People who are on the ground means ground reality. It has nothing to do with seniority and juniority. So what this leads to is that the enterprise architects don't understand the challenges that the people face when they're implementing the standards that they're preaching, right? And then slowly what happens is there is a rebellion that arises. People start taking exceptions to the standards and provide justifications for it, and then they keep on taking exceptions for everything that is not suitable. They look at the enterprise architecture team as a bureaucracy and red tape and not as an enabler. And then over a period of time, there are so many exceptions. There are more exceptions than there are compliances. And then eventually the leadership thinks that the enterprise architecture team is not adding value or not relevant. And then eventually somebody cuts the funding and the EA team dies. So just the ivory tower doesn't kill the enterprise architecture team immediately. It's not a crash and burn, all right? But it is definitely a slow death. And that's not what we want to be. The solution to this is negotiation, right? Majority of the organizations in the world are what I call a buy-in model. What that means is there are stakeholders, and then we negotiate with the stakeholders and we try to understand their requirements, their challenges, the environment that they work in, and then we negotiate. Now, this is a good segue into politics, right? There's a lot of politics that enterprise architects need to handle. Now, people think politics is a dirty word, okay? People think that, I've heard so many people say that I left the organization because there was too much politics, right? Or I could not handle the politics, man. I just want to do my work. I can't handle the politics. But it's not really a dirty word, is it? What I look at politics as is stakeholder management. You see, what I feel is that the people who work for an organization are human beings. They're not just workers, right? Every person who comes into the organization does not come in to help the organization grow, right? Of course, that's one of the goals. But we human beings have other aspects to our personality as well. I've seen people who come to work so that they can get paid, so that they can go out on vacations. So vacations is the reason why they come to work. I've seen people who come to work because they want to grow in the organization. So designation and title and hierarchical height is a very important thing for them. And then I've seen people who come to work for money, right? They just want money. Doesn't matter the hierarchy, doesn't matter, what they're doing. They just come in for the money. And then there are people who like a decent work-life balance. And then there are people who are passionate about their work. Of course, the money helps, there's no doubt about it, but that's not the reason why they come to work. Not the money, not the vacations, nothing. They come to work because they enjoy what they do. And if one day suddenly something changes and they're not able to do the things that they are passionate about, even if they're getting good money and growth, they would leave the organization because they don't enjoy the work that they're doing. So every human being has other aspects to their personality. And stakeholder management and politics is understanding that, accepting that every human being has personal agendas of why they take certain decisions at work, or what is it that they're really trying to do. So when you understand that, you understand stakeholder management, you understand politics. So enterprise architecture is negotiation. You negotiate with your stakeholders, try to understand what is it that they really want, balance out their priorities, and then based on that, and engage every program, every project personally. Try to understand what is it that the program is trying to do. And if required, your standards and best practices need to evolve, right? If you see that there are multiple exceptions happening for a particular standard, then probably it is time to reevaluate the standard itself. What this does is, one is people are happier because they look at enterprise architects as an enabler, and that's a given. You don't have to, it's obvious. But another hidden advantage of this is enterprise architects become more relevant. See, enterprise architecture is a career in which you don't really get to implement the programs and projects that you sort of design or you advise, right? It's a consulting role where you just tell people what to do and they do it, right? Teams are implementing, and there are many nuances of implementation that enterprise architects don't get to learn. But when you do this negotiation, when you start getting engaged to projects, and obviously you cannot get engaged like a programmer will, because they're doing the actual implementation, or an infrastructure engineer for that matter, or the one who's implementing it. You can't get engaged on a day-to-day basis. But even if you get engaged at a program level, right, you'll get to learn a lot of things. You'll get to understand many things about new technologies, about new standards, about new best practices, about what's working, what's not working. It'll keep you relevant, it'll keep you grounded, and that will help you a lot in your career. So that's the first truth. Enterprise architecture is a negotiation and not control. The second truth is enterprise architecture frameworks are scaffolding and not scripture. Simply put, while the frameworks are a very good place to start with, they are not the do-all, end-all. Okay, they are there to help us out, and that's all they are, right? Let me explain. So when I started my career as an enterprise architect and I did my certification, I told you about it. We decided that after we set up the architecture board and the various activities within the preliminary phase of TOGAF, and we were doing TOGAF, right? One of the things that had to be done was select a proper tool. So we ran a POC, we invited various tool vendors, and we chose Orbis Software's iServer. At that time it was called iServer, now it's called Orbis Infinity. And it's a very, very useful tool. And TOGAF comes pre-implemented on on iServer. So I started using the tool, right? Preliminary phase, these are the things which are done. And the tool actually advises you. When you go into the tool, there'll be a sort of like a directory that guides you. So there'll be a directory called preliminary phase, and it'll show you all the deliverables of preliminary phase within it with templates and everything. You just double click on the template, open it up, and it uses Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Visio as editors. You can go into like a Word document, for example, for architecture vision, for example, right? Or architecture definition document. And it'll show you all the headers. You can just fill out the headers. It'll even give you guidance as to what goes into each header and all of that. And then every phase has this. Every phase has the various artifacts, various deliverables, various architectural building blocks pre-built into it. So you can just go ahead and customize it according to, or fill in with the data that needs to be filled in for that particular program. Diagrams can be built very easily. And suddenly you get tunnel vision. You get sucked into this tool that gives you so much pre-built information that suddenly you start thinking that the TOGAF framework is enterprise architecture. You need to follow the framework. You need to stick to what the tool says, right? And you forget that enterprise architecture is not about the framework or about the tooling. These are just tools that help you gather the information and, sort of connect the dots. But the larger objective of enterprise architecture is to take a step back and look at the bigger picture view and help the leadership in coming up with strategies and such. So another thing is enterprise architecture is the job of enterprise architects. It is not the job of other people within the organization. They're not interested about enterprise architecture. If you go and tell them that this is the information that I need and this is how it needs to be filled in, it's not their job, it's yours. So enterprise architecture frameworks are a very good scaffolding. They will give you a very good start. The tooling, the frameworks, the deliverables that you need to. Basically, what's a framework? A framework is a list of deliverables and a method, right? The list of deliverables of each phase of the ADM, for example, right? Within TOGAF. There are other frameworks, and Zachman does that too. It gives you a list of all the deliverables at various layers and various sections of the organization, and that's what you do. You gather information using those artifacts and deliverables. So they are a very good enabler and a very good tool to gather information and to build the intelligence that you need to build, but they are not the end, right? You use these as tools, you gather information, but then you step back, you look at the strategy, and you customize these frameworks, right? The frameworks are there for organizations so that they can customize it. In fact, TOGAF says it right at the beginning that you need to customize the framework according to the organization's specific needs. You can do it at the higher level, where the whole framework at a higher level can be customized, and then you can go in and look at the architecture vision phase, for example, and see, okay, these are the 5 deliverables, artifacts, and building blocks that it recommends, and but this particular program is simpler. I don't need 5. I can just make do with 2 or 3, right? Or you could say that this is a very complex program. 5 deliverables are not enough. I will also need X, Y, and Z. I can add those, and so on and so forth. So understand that the framework exists for us to be able to build strategy. Strategy is not going to change itself according to the framework, right? And this is something that we often forget, and this is the second hard truth that I've learned over the years. The third hard truth about enterprise architecture is narrative intelligence is a superpower. Narrative intelligence means storytelling. Enterprise architects are storytellers. One of the misconceptions of the industry today about enterprise architects is that they sit around doing doodles. That's not all that enterprise architects do. Let me give you an analogy of a construction architect, right? My father was a construction architect, and I have seen him do his work since I was a small child. What he would do is he would first talk to the stakeholder. In his case, it would be the owner of the house or someone who wants to get a house built, or a commercial complex or a residential complex or what have you. And he understands the requirements. He tries to understand what is it that they're really looking for, and then he builds models. Now, why does he build models? Because building a house and showing it to the customer and then the customer not liking it and so breaking the house down is a very expensive affair, and it's unrealistic and it's impractical, right? So what we do is we build cheap models. Models are cheaper than the actual house, right? Models are a mock representation of the actual house. So he builds cheap models that he can show to the customer that this is how your house is going to eventually look like. Do you like it? Do you not like it? And then if the customer says, no, I don't like these rooms, 2 rooms put together like this, I want the room to be here, I want a common bathroom, I want the staircase from the inside of the house, not the outside of the house, and so on. And then we throw away these models and rebuild new models because, again, it's cheap, right? And then once the owner of the house approves the models, we move forward with it. Now, a construction architect doesn't just have one stakeholder, right? One of the stakeholders is the owner of the house. But then there are multiple people who are going to be working on the house who are also the stakeholders of the construction architect. So there is a building contractor, a plumber, an electricals guy, a sanitation guy, and so on and so forth. He shows different models to different stakeholders. Depending upon who the stakeholder is and what it is that they are going to do with the house, they need relevant models. So he builds those models and then he gives it to them. And that's not where his job ends, right? His job continues. The construction architect needs to ensure that the house that is being built is compliant. It is as per the design, right? There aren't any differences, and if there are differences required, then they need to be vetted out. So he needs to make sure that the implementation is as per the design. And there's a ton of negotiation that happens throughout the entire process, right? The sanitation guy will come and say that, this is how you've designed the rooms and this is how the sanitation is going to be, but it's going to be tricky and the cost is going to be higher. If we change the room a little bit here and move the bathroom from here to there, then, it'll be a lot better. And then he needs to go and take it to the user and saying, or the owner of the house, and say that these are some design changes proposed, what do you think, and get it approved and so on. So there's a lot of negotiation among stakeholders that happens. It is exactly the same with enterprise architects. They're not just doodle makers, okay? They are involved with all the different stakeholders, understanding the requirements from them and implementing them. They are the negotiators between various stakeholders. So their job doesn't end there, and this requires a lot of skills. Skills such as negotiation skills, stakeholder management skills, leadership skills, communication skills, and so on and so forth. Now, TOGAF framework has something called a capability framework, within which it has a skills framework that shows the various skills that enterprise architects require. And when I say enterprise architect, I'm actually generalizing it. Within enterprise architecture also, there are different roles, right? Business architect, data architect, application architect, technology architect, architecture leader, owner of the enterprise architecture organization, and so on and so forth. And it's a complex and beautiful skills framework, and someday I will present it here. But understand that there are many skills required, but one of the most core skills needed for an enterprise architect to be able to do all of this, negotiating and communicating, is storytelling. All right, they need to be exceptionally good storytellers. They need to connect the dots between the business requirements, the applications, the technologies, the implementation, the project management, the timelines, all these different, dots, and connect all of this with the strategy and the goal and the objective, and all of that in the form of a story. So storytelling is a very important skill, and I'm not talking about once upon a time in a land far, far away there was a king. Not that kind of story. This is storytelling about the business, right? Storytelling about data and so on. So storytelling is a very important skill that every enterprise architect needs to start acquiring. And if you are at the beginning part of your career as an enterprise architect, then I would recommend that instead of just focusing on technical skills and tools and frameworks, also start thinking about storytelling, about visualizing the bigger picture and how you would tell a story. Which is a fantastic segue into the next segment of this podcast, which is a book review. Today we are going to review a book called Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer-Nafek. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name properly, but it's a beautiful book which is about data visualization and storytelling using data visualization. Instead of focusing on flashy charts and graphs that you can create in PowerPoint, it focuses on simplicity, clarity, and audience awareness. The prime focus of this book is don't just show data, but tell a story. If your data is not telling a story, then what's the point? If you're looking at your audience and if you're presenting some data to them, it needs to be actionable. What does the audience either learn out of this and how is it going to change their behavior? Or probably you need to take a decision based on the data. So the story needs to be able to compel you to take a decision, and so on and so forth. It's a simple book to read, approachable, and there are some real world use cases in it where they show the real business context and how data can be presented in a much better way in the form of a story. So I strongly recommend the book, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. Once again, If you're enjoying the videos that I'm publishing here on Enterprise Architecture Radio, then like, subscribe, and share. And comment. Do let me know what you think about the videos. Do let me know if you think that there are some topics that I should cover as a part of these videos. Once again, I would like to remind you that Enterprise Architecture Radio is not just a podcast, but a collaboration platform where people get together and guide each other, help each other out, but most importantly, have a ton of fun.